Look at that wall. Maybe it is a credit card statement you cannot open. Maybe it is a business that refuses to move. Maybe it is a number in your bank account that has not changed in months, no matter how hard you push against it. You have been trying everything, working harder, cutting expenses, sending applications, arguing with the numbers. And still, the wall stands. Here is the belief shift you need right now, before we go any further. That wall is not real, not in the way you think. The debt is a symbol. The crisis is a shadow. The limitation you are staring at is a three-dimensional echo of an inner condition, and it has absolutely no power unless you keep feeding it your attention and your belief. Thousands of years ago, a story was written into the ancient scriptures that most people read as military history. But Neville Goddard decoded it as something else entirely. He saw in the story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho a precise psychological blueprint for how any human being can collapse a seemingly impossible barrier and walk into abundance on the other side. That blueprint is what this video is about. Stay with us. Because by the end of this, the wall you are looking at will never look the same again. Stop for a moment and think honestly about how you have been responding to your financial situation. Have you been researching it constantly? Calculating it? Telling people about it? Lying awake at 3 in the morning running the numbers again? If so, you are not attacking the wall. You are rebuilding it. This is the trap that Neville Goddard described as arguing with the three-dimensional world. When you treat a problem as the primary reality, when you give it the majority of your mental energy and emotional weight, you are making a declaration to your deeper mind. You are saying, "This is what is real. This is what is true. This is what I believe in." And your subconscious mind, which does not evaluate or argue, simply agrees. It accepts the instruction and continues manufacturing evidence of exactly the limitation you fear. Neville Goddard taught consistently that the outer world is a projection. It is not the source, it is the screen. The source is always the inner state, the assumption held in consciousness, the feeling accepted as fact. He said, "The world is yourself pushed out. Every person, every circumstance, every debt, and every breakthrough is an externalization of an inner condition." This means something radical. It means that trying to fix a financial problem by only operating in the physical dimension is like trying to change a movie by touching the screen. You can press your hands against it all day. The image will not change. The projector is somewhere else. Now, why do most people stay stuck in this loop? Because the wall feels real. It has weight. It has dates. It has names of creditors attached to it. The three-dimensional world comes with enormous sensory evidence, and our nervous systems are trained since birth to treat sensory evidence as truth. Neville Goddard called this living in the slavery of the senses. It is the condition of believing only what the eyes confirm, only what the hands can touch, only what the current bank balance displays, and in that condition no lasting change is possible, because you are always reacting to what already exists instead of creating what does not yet exist in physical form. The wall of Jericho, in the deepest reading of the scripture, represents exactly this. It represents the hardened outer crust of a belief system. It represents the accumulated sensory evidence of lack. It is the sum total of every time you looked at reality and said, "This is permanent." And the children of Israel were told something that must have sounded insane. Do not attack it. Do not negotiate with it. March around it in silence. Ignore its height. Ignore its thickness. Obey an inner instruction. Hold an inner certainty. And on the appointed day, shout as if it is already done. That is the code. And we are just beginning to crack it open. Notice what you are not being told to do. You are not being told to pretend the wall does not exist. You are not being told to be naive or irresponsible. You are being told something far more sophisticated. You are being told to withdraw your belief from the wall's permanence and redirect that belief toward an inner reality that has not yet appeared in the physical. That shift in inner allegiance is the entire game. Neville Goddard was not a casual reader of Scripture. He was trained in Kabbalistic and mystical interpretation by his mentor, the man known only as Abdullah, an Ethiopian rabbi living in New York whose methods were so radical they could shatter a person's entire framework of reality in a single conversation. Under Abdullah's guidance, Neville came to understand that every story in the ancient text is a psychological drama. Every character is a state of consciousness. Every event is an inner event first. With that lens, look at what the story of Joshua and Jericho actually describes. Joshua, in Hebrew, is the same name as the Master, the name itself meaning the Lord is salvation, or more precisely, I am is the deliverer. Joshua is not merely a military commander. He is a symbol of the disciplined, spiritually awakened self that has claimed its inheritance and refuses to be denied. Jericho, in Hebrew, comes from a root connected to the word ruach, meaning breath, spirit, and also the faculty of scent, of spiritual perception. The Kabbalistic tradition holds that scent is the subtlest of the senses, the one most connected to the soul. Jericho represents the outer form of the world, the city of sensory illusion, the dimension of appearances that must be circled before it can be entered and transformed. The siege itself lasts 7 days. 7 in Scripture is always the number of completion, of the full cycle, of the mind coming to its Sabbath rest. The 7 days of circling represent the discipline of holding a mental state in silence without demanding that the physical world confirm it prematurely. This is critical. Every day those soldiers circled that wall, the wall did not move. To the rational mind, nothing was happening. To any outside observer, it was an absurd strategy. But internally, something was being built. A conviction, a certainty, a pressure of spiritual assumption that had no cracks in it. And on the 7th day, the 7th circuit, the priests blew the ram's horn, and the people shouted with one voice. Not a shout of desperation, not a plea, a shout of absolute conviction, of completed inner fact, of claimed reality. And the walls fell. Neville Goddard drew directly from this story in his teaching on what he called the feeling of the wish fulfilled. He taught that the shout of Jericho is the emotional certainty that something is already done before the physical evidence arrives. He wrote, "Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows." The shout was not the cause of the walls falling. The shout was the outer expression of an inner state that had already conquered. The walls had already fallen in consciousness before a single stone moved in the physical world. Now hear this, because it changes everything. You do not need to shout out loud. You need to reach the inner equivalent of that shout. The unshakable, quiet, bone-deep knowing that your financial wall is already gone, that the debt is dissolving, that the income is flowing, that the breakthrough has already occurred on the only plane that matters, the plane of assumption, the plane of inner fact. Neville Goddard also shared a personal story that illustrates this principle. When he was once deeply without funds and separated from his family, facing what looked like an impossible situation, he did not beg and he did not scheme. He went into the silence. He constructed, in his imagination, the specific scene that would imply the wish fulfilled. He held it until it had the feeling of reality. And then he let it go, trusting the inner to arrange the outer. Within days, reality bent toward his assumption. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was the law operating exactly as it always operates, serving the dominant inner state of the one who holds it. Your dominant inner state right now is the most important financial asset you possess. The Jericho Code is not mythology. It is a map of a psychological and spiritual law that operates with the precision of mathematics. Neville Goddard called it the law of assumption. And in his book Out of This World, he stated it plainly. He wrote that the assumption of the wish fulfilled is the means by which the aim is realized. The degree of reality you attach to the imagined state is the degree to which that state will appear in your waking world. Let us slow that down, because this is the core of everything. An assumption is simply an accepted state of consciousness. It is not a loud declaration. It is not willpower. It is not the grinding repetition of affirmations said through clenched teeth. An assumption is a resting place. It is the inner posture from which you view the world. When you assume debt, you see debt everywhere. Opportunities appear closed. Numbers look small. Time feels short. Your perception organizes itself around the assumption and confirms it constantly. When you assume abundance, not wish for it, not hope for it, but genuinely assume it as your natural state, the opposite occurs. Perception reorganizes. Doors that were invisible become obvious. People who could not help you suddenly appear. Resources emerge through channels you did not plan. This is not because you willed those things into existence. It is because the law is impersonal. It always, without exception, reflects the inner state of the observer back to them in physical form. Now, here is where most people stumble on this law. They hear it, they believe it intellectually, and then they go back to their life and immediately reassume the old state. They check the bank account and react with fear. They read the news and react with contraction. They talk to a friend about how hard things are, and in doing so, they undo in 60 seconds the assumption they tried to build in meditation. Neville Goddard was direct about this. He said that a change of fortune begins with a change in the sense of identity, not a change in strategy, not a change in tactics, a change in who you understand yourself to be at the level of consciousness. The soldier who circles Jericho in silence is practicing exactly this. He is refusing to let the size of the wall redefine his sense of identity. He keeps marching. He keeps holding. He does not look at the wall and update his inner assumption based on what he sees. His inner assumption is fixed on the fallen wall, on the entered city, on the inheritance claimed. That is the law of assumption in action. And here is something that Abdullah taught Neville that you must hear. Abdullah told Neville that it is done. When Neville came to him with an outer problem, describing the physical conditions in detail, Abdullah would simply say, "It is done," and refuse to discuss the problem further. Not out of cruelty. Out of the deepest spiritual respect for Neville's potential. Because to engage endlessly with the problem was to feed the assumption of the problem's reality. It is done. Those 3 words represent the most powerful financial strategy in existence, when spoken from a genuine inner knowing rather than empty bravado. They represent the completed inner fact, the assumed state of the wish fulfilled, the inner shout before the walls fall. You are not pretending the wall is not there. You are choosing to stop funding it with your inner allegiance. You are marching in silence, holding an inner certainty, and declaring in consciousness what has already occurred on the only plane that has real creative power. The 3-dimensional wall has no choice but to respond. Now, let us bring this ancient code into the language of the world you are living in today. Joseph Murphy, whose work in The Power of Your Subconscious Mind reached millions of practical readers, described the same fundamental process in operational terms. Murphy taught that the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. It responds to the emotional impression, not to the factual circumstances. Murphy described the subconscious as a garden. Whatever seed of thought is planted with emotional intensity and repetition will grow, regardless of whether the gardener wants it to. Most people have been unconsciously planting seeds of fear, seeds of lack, seeds of impossible, for years, and then they wonder why the garden keeps producing the same harvest. The Jericho method, as Murphy would frame it, is a conscious reseeding. It is the deliberate act of going into the subconscious through the doorway of sleep, through relaxed contemplation, through the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and planting a new impression, not once with desperation, with calm repetition, with the same consistency used to circle that wall for 7 days. Murphy wrote that whatever you claim and feel to be true, your subconscious will move heaven and earth to make objectively true. Heaven and earth. That is a precise metaphor. Heaven is the inner, the causal. Earth is the outer, the effect. When the inner claim is made clearly and completely, the outer must reorganize to match it. Now consider the Kabbalistic layer. The name Jericho, connected to the Hebrew root for scent and spiritual perception, tells us something about the nature of the breakthrough. In Kabbalistic understanding, scent is associated with the world of formation, the layer just beneath physical manifestation. It is the first whisper of the inner becoming outer. Before the walls fell, before the stones moved, there was a spiritual event, a collapse in that formative layer, in the dimension of subtle perception that the physical eye cannot register. This means the breakthrough always happens in the invisible first. You do not see it fall before it falls. You perceive it fall in the inner sense, in the felt sense of conviction and certainty. And then, inevitably, the physical follows. Abdullah's approach to this was even more radical. He was known to simply refuse to acknowledge a problem once it had been spiritually resolved. When Neville described his outer circumstances, Abdullah would not engage with them. He would not pray over them, analyze them, or offer sympathy. He would say the work is done, and redirect the conversation entirely. This was not dismissiveness. This was mastery. Abdullah understood that every moment of engaged attention given to the problem was a moment of reinforcement. Every discussion of the wall made the wall more solid in the inner world. Your financial wall needs to be starved of your inner attention, not ignored with denial, not suppressed with effort, simply given less creative authority. Treated, as Neville Goddard said, as the world of Caesar, the world of effects, which is always subject to change the moment the inner world shifts. Do the work in consciousness, and then let the three-dimensional world catch up. You do not need to understand how the breakthrough will come. That is not your job. Your job is to hold the inner state of one who has already broken through, to carry the feeling of the fallen wall into your morning, to speak about your finances the way someone speaks about a problem that no longer exists, to stop giving the outer world the authority to define what is possible for you. Consciousness is the only causative reality. The physical world, including every financial wall you have ever built or inherited or feared, is always and only an effect. Claim the abundance. Claim the dissolved debt. Claim the open doors. Not in desperation. Not in performance. In the settled, unshakable knowing of one who has already seen the walls fall where it matters most. Inside. That is the Jericho Code. And it works. If this message reached something real in you, if something shifted as you watched this, then you are already part of this community. Subscribe to the Goddard Code and join thousands of people who are learning to apply these principles not as philosophy, but as a living daily practice. Every video here is a step deeper into the truth that Neville Goddard spent his life teaching, that consciousness creates reality, that imagination is the only God, and that your walls are already falling. Hit subscribe. Turn on the bell. Share this video with someone whose wall needs to come down today. Neville Goddard left us with words worth carrying into every morning of your life. He said, "Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows. Your walls are already fallen. Your inheritance is already waiting. Walk in."